Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pastor Says. Today we'll be coming from the New King James Version of the Bible, from the book of 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 17 through 29. And we'll be coming from the subject of a battle worth fighting. You don't want to miss out? Open up your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to start at verse 17, and we're going to break down these scriptures and give you a little backstory leading up to a battle worth fighting. And let's start at verse 17 through 20.
Then Jesse said to his son David, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of these dry grains and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp." And he carried these 10 cheeses to the captain of the thousands. And he carried these 10 cheeses to the captain of their thousands, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them. Now Saul, as they and all of the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Palestinians.
So the backstory to that, let me give you the backstory. The children of Israel are on one side of the hill, and in the middle is a valley. And on the other side of the hill is their enemy, the Philistines. And all of David's 7 brothers are in the army, and they're waiting for the battle to start. Now David is at home tending to the sheep. And Jesse, the father of David and the 7 brothers, decided to give David a little assignment. He instructed David to take this bag lunch and take it to your brothers so that they could have something to eat and gather their strength for this great battle that the dad thought that was going to take place. And David, being who he was, being an obedient son, thought nothing bad about doing what his dad asked him to do, even though it was a small assignment. He said, "David, take these lunches to your brothers so that they could eat." And you know, the thought that I just got from that was, don't despise small beginnings, because you never know where your small beginnings may lead you to. All he was instructed to do was take some bag lunches to his brother, take the lunches, drop them off, and come back home. But sometimes when we're on our road of destiny and purpose, those small beginnings turn into huge opportunities. And along that path to the huge opportunities, what the devil does, he sends distractions. So much stuff is going on in the world right now. Not just in America, where we're seeing all these trials and these shootings and people dying unnecessarily. And it's not even relegated to age. We see so many young folks dying right now. It used to be that the young would bury the old. But now we are witnessing before our very eyes of the old burying the young. David had no clue that he was on the road of destiny. He had no clue what God had in store for him from just dropping off lunches for his brothers. We have to get away from the distractions that so encumber us, because it's the enemy that throws those distractions as we're going down the road of destiny and the road of opportunity, to get us off those roads so we can get entangled with every little bit of situations that come along our way. You know, I don't want to just fight every battle. Me personally, I want to fight the battles that are pertinent to winning the war. And we're going to see David making the right decision at the right time when opportunity knocks at your door. So let's start back at verse 20, and let's see what's going on there.
So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouted for battle.
Okay. As David is arriving to locate his brothers, the army of God, they're all pumped up. They're looking across the valley. They see the Philistines all lined up on the other side, and they're just shouting and all sorts of words to them that I cannot repeat on film. And they are eager and ready to go out to battle. And David is coming to a scene like this. Keep going.
For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hands of the supply keeper and ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers.
So David left the food with the supply people, the people that supplied the army with food, feeding them. And he was eager just to see his brothers. David loved his brothers. And instead of dropping off the lunches, he proceeded to make his way through the crowd of these battle-fit men. And he saw his brothers, and a smile came on his face. And he greeted his brothers. And look what happened.
Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke accordingly to the same words. So David heard them. And then the men of Israel, when they saw him, fled from him, and was dreadfully afraid.
Okay, so David is in the midst of the army now. And they were all jacked up to go fight until they saw this Philistine called Goliath. And Goliath wore a vestitude, an armory of all sorts of helmets and shields that covered his chest and covered his thighs and covered his shin and his feet and his arms. And when the sun would hit off that metal, it gave off a glow. And guess what happened? Those once battle-fit men, when they saw this 10-foot giant with a spear in his hand and all that armory on his body, the Bible said that spirit of courage left them and the spirit of fear entered into them. And they became dreadfully, not just afraid, but dreadfully afraid of what they saw. So many times we get afraid of what we see. And let me tell you, fear is nothing but false evidence that appears real. It appears real, but it's not really real. And it can damage us to the point that it gives us a perspective in our mind that I'm not going to make it through this time. Things ain't going to turn around this time. Things ain't going to get better this time. Because of the Goliath that we face in our life. But I'm here to tell you, saints, that God is bigger than any Goliath that you will ever face in your life.
So the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his family house exemption from taxes in Israel."
Okay, so David asked what was the reward for the man that slew this giant. Because Goliath within the valley talking crazy to the people of God. And nobody wanted to engage in him or with him. So David asked, what does the man who defeats this giant, what is the rewards that he shall receive? And there was 3 rewards that Saul had promised the man of God, the men of Israel, who would defeat this giant. One was that the king will give them all the money that they could ever want. Number 2 was that the king will not only give them the money that they wanted, but he will also give one of his daughters that you will be part of the king's family. And number 3 would be that you will be exempt from paying taxes, you and your family, for the rest of your life. 3 things that Saul promised. You see, what got me about Goliath was that he's a giant, right? But Goliath is not David's giant. Goliath is Saul's giant. So we see David is getting involved in somebody else's mess. And so many times we end up fighting other people's fight instead of fighting, choosing the right fight for us to fight. This was not David's problem. David was only coming to drop off some luncheon for his brother. But now he's engrossed in the atmosphere and the environment of what's going on. And God's mighty men are afraid to go down and challenge that one giant, that one man. One thing that we have to understand, and it's taken me a while to understand this, is that we have to learn that confrontation is healthy. We have to learn that confrontation is necessary. We have to learn that confrontation is part of our journey. We have to learn to confront the giants that's in our path along the way. And it's not comfortable, and it is definitely not easy, but it's necessary. Please read.
Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?
Now, check this out real quick. Here is this young, David had to be about 17 years old, this young kid. He's in the midst of all these battle-ridden men, okay? These men were used to war, but yet not one of them wanted to engage in a fight with that giant. David comes into the situation. Look who he's talking about. They talking about the giant. David's talking about God. David's bringing God into the equation. And that's what we have to do when we are facing our giants. Don't look at the giant. Yeah, that's a giant of a situation you in, brother. That's a giant of a situation you in, sister. Yes, you are. That's reality. But look at God being more bigger than what you in. Start changing the conversation. He said, who is this giant that's defying the armies of the living God? He brings God into the equation. And so many times we don't bring God into the equation. We just focus in on the giant. Well, Mr. Williams or Mr. Smith, or you have cancer. And all of a sudden, like, we go home and want to die, man. Instead of knowing that he is Jehovah Rapha. He is the healing God. He is Dr. God. And there's no ailment that he cannot heal. Well, they kicked you off the job. He is the God with the cattle on the many hills, the silver and the gold is God. Well, he's the God of everything. Maybe it's your marriage. You don't have to listen to Oprah. You don't have to listen to Dr. Phil. All you got to do is invoke God into the equation, because he's the greatest counselor that ever is and ever was and ever will be. Let's keep reading. We're almost done.
And the people answered him in a manner, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him.
Now this next verse that our sister's going to read. I want you to listen to what she's reading and let it soak in. Because so many times when we go to this chapter, we focus in on David, what we should. We focus in on Goliath. We focus in on the slingshot. But I have never heard, not never, but I don't hear too many teaching lessons and sermons focus in on 28. So listen.
Now Eliab, his older brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle.
Read it one more time, because I want it to soak in.
Now Eliab, his older brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I have known your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle.
David was bringing lunches. David, after he dropped the lunches off, he wanted to see his brothers. David was wounded because he heard this giant cussing and cursing against God. He took it personal. And now, all of a sudden, his brother is dissing him in front of everybody. Eliab. He told him three things. First, he said, why did you come down here? What you doing here? You ain't supposed to be here. In front of everybody, trying to make David look small. Then he went on to say, and with whom have you left them few sheep in the wilderness? Then he tried to humiliate him and look small. You ain't nothing but a little shepherd. And David had way more than a few sheep that he attended to. And then lastly, he made an accusation that was not true. He said, I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. You're just being nosy. You just want to be in the in crowd. And so many times, when we're on that road to destiny, the road to opportunity, the Eliabs will come along before your giant, before your Goliath, to discourage you from going forward. And you got to watch those Eliabs, because they always come before the blessing. You got to watch the Eliabs, man. And now that I'm pointing them out to you, when they do come, you'll know, wait a minute. God is getting ready to bless me. God is getting ready to take me to a higher level. God is getting ready to bring me opportunities. God is getting ready to open up doors that I've never seen. And God is finna bring my vision to fruition. God is getting ready to move, because the Eliabs of the world is trying to discourage me and trying to distract me from going forward. And so many times we get to that point right there and we stop. He could have got his feelings hurt, and his feelings was probably hurt. He could have turned around and said, okay, I'm going on home. He put his head down He could have gave up. But look what he did.
And David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?"
He said, brother, in front of everybody. Now they're all looking at him. Goliath down in the valley cursing God. He said, he didn't cuss him out. He didn't get physical with him. He wasn't even mad with him. He let his passion for his God and his love for his God speak. He said, is this not a cause? Is this not where we're supposed to fight? Is this not a battle that we should engage in? See, so many times the enemy try to get you to fight fights that you don't need to fight. Because God is the one that fights your battles. So he tries to get you distracted and get people at each other, couples at each other, friends at each other. Look at the world now. Black and white and Black Lives Matter and policemen, all sorts of array of scenes and venues where people are just at each other. And they're ready to fight and they're ready to kill. We're seeing all these shootings and swords on the streets and at all sorts of spas and, just everywhere. You don't know if you're safe, where you can be safe, because we're being distracted and we're turning it on each other and we're fighting the wrong fight and we're looking at the wrong enemy. I'm not your enemy and you're not mine. The devil is our enemy. Look what he said. Is this not a cause? Don't you hear that giant down there cursing out the God that provided for you, the God that rolled you up this morning, the God that took care of you, takes care of you, God that feeds you and clothes you? Is this not a cause? You got to know what battle to fight. And this battle, David said, is worth fighting. Now look, as we end this, come to our conclusion. Look at this young boy, this young 17-year-old, in the midst of all these battle-hard men that used to killing and going to war. But look what he did based on what Eliab told him.
Then he turned for him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did.
Read it again, sister.
Then he turned for him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did.
Look what he did. In spite of being humiliated, in spite of having false accusations hurled at you, in spite of trying to be laughed at, made fun of, he wasn't looking at his brother, because the Bible said he turned from his brother and towards the battle. Because he knew that this fight was worth fighting. And if don't nobody else go down there and fight that giant, I'll go. I'll go. And you know the end of the story. He went down there. And when Goliath saw this little young, handsome looking boy, curly hair and all that, dark skin, he felt disrespected because he was a great warrior. He said, how dare you send a little boy to do a man's job? David told him straight up, I'm going to kill you. I'm paraphrasing. I'm going to kill you and then cut your head off with your sword. The giant Goliath became infuriated. And the Bible says that Goliath didn't run towards David. David ran towards his problem. David ran towards Saul's problem. David ran towards Israel's problem. And he went in his bag and took one stone out, put it in his sling, hurled it around a few times to get some velocity, and he let it go. Now mind you, check this out. The helmet that Goliath had on, the only open space was right up in the middle of his forehead as he's running and whirling. And Goliath, that giant that's in your life, is like, I got you, sister. I'm going to consume you this time. He let it fly. And when he let it fly, it landed in the middle, right between that opening in his helmet. Tell me that ain't God. And he fell backwards to the earth. David didn't have a sword. So he went and grabbed that big heavy sword. Probably had to grab it with two hands since this man is about 10 feet tall. And he raised it high, y'all. And he came down and cut off the head of the prize warrior for the Philistine. Took the head, held it up. And when the people of Israel, the army, saw that, they started shouting. And the Philistines got afraid and started running. And the armies pursued them and killed all of them. When you know what battle is worth fighting, guess what? You too will defeat your giant and cut his head off. And in ending, you may say, Pastor, I don't have a stone. But what you do have is a rock. You'll get there. You'll get there later. And all you got to do is lay on that rock and call out to your God to fight your giants and your Goliaths. And you too shall be victorious in the end. And everybody shall benefit from one person knowing what battle is worth fighting. You be blessed now. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pastor Says. Do us a favor. Subscribe to our channel, like our Facebook, give us comments, and keep on watching. And we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Until next time, be blessed.